So good afternoon. Lieutenant Governor Polito and I are honored to be here today to nominate Boston Municipal Court Associate Justice Serge George Jr. to serve on the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. Justice George has served on the BMC for the previous 7 years with great distinction. His colleagues use words like rock star, fantastic judge, great mentor, wonderful teacher, an outstanding example when they talk about his time on the bench. Several said they would hate to lose him, but believed he'd be an ideal candidate to serve on the SJC. The lawyers who practiced before him say similar things. Many said he's their favorite judge, but not because he gives them the answer they want, but because he knows the law, does his homework, and treats everyone in his courtroom with dignity and respect. For the past 17 years, Justice George has also taught evidence, trial advocacy, professional responsibility, and the rules of civil practice and procedure at Suffolk University Law School, his alma mater. Student surveys make clear that he is one of their favorites, and he's equally admired and respected by his colleagues on the faculty for his ability to turn legal and procedural theory into real-life practice in the classroom for students. His former colleagues in private practice, which range from very large firms with hundreds of clients to much smaller firms with boutique practice expertise, all say similar things. Their colleague is one of a kind, a great lawyer, a great advocate, and a great partner. But above all else, Serge George is a great person. Finally, it does seem clear that no matter when Justice George becomes your friend and colleague, that relationship will last. His life today is rich with friends and associates that date back to his time in high school and college, and many of his colleagues from across his more than 20 years in the legal profession remain in constant contact with him. He's someone people do not forget, and time again, it was clear that those who know him well feel blessed to be part of his circle of life. His personal story is also special. He grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Kane Square in Dorchester, sharing a bedroom with his sisters until he was in his 20s. They were one of the first Haitian families in Upham's Corner, and they loved the diversity of their neighborhood. His dad worked nights at Honeywell and taught in the Boston Public Schools during the day. His mom was a data entry clerk for the Boston Stock Exchange. The family stayed in that 2-bedroom apartment until all 3 kids were out of the house, because it was more important to Serge's parents to send their children to Catholic schools than it was to buy a home. All 3 children went to St. Kevin's Grammar School. His sisters went to Monsignor Ryan Memorial High School, and Serge went to Boston College High School. In keeping with his lifelong commitment to giving back to those who gave to him, he proudly serves on the Boston College High School Board of Trustees. Once all 3 children were in college, a daughter at Tufts and a son and a daughter at Boston College, his parents eventually purchased a home in Randolph. It should come as no surprise that Justice George and his wife Michelle also purchased a home in Randolph, not too far from his parents, where they live with their 2 daughters, Olivia and Samantha. Thanks for being with us. History tells us that it's rare for someone serving on the District Court or the Boston Municipal Court to be nominated to the Supreme Judicial Court. In fact, it's unusual for anyone who's ever sat on the District Court to serve on the SJC. That is an unfortunate fact. The SJC renders decisions that affect the work and therefore the decisions and practices of every court in Massachusetts. Associate Justice of the SJC, David Lowy, is one of the very small number of district court judges who has served on the SJC, and his opinions reflect that. Having another voice on our highest court that comes with the real-world experience of the district court will improve the quality of the discussion and debate, and ultimately the quality of the decisions that will be rendered. Let me just close with this. the unedited comments of someone who serves with Justice George on the Boston Municipal Court civil sessions. Pretty much says it all. Serge George would be fantastic on the Supreme Judicial Court. He has such a high work ethic. He's a great team player. He gets along with everyone. Open, warm, and humble. He treats colleagues well. He's open to hearing differing viewpoints. He's respected by everyone. He has great common sense. He's just brilliant, with a lot of civil background from his days in private practice. He did a spectacular job overseeing the drug court and has direct knowledge of the community. He is everything you would want in a judge. We agree, and that's why we're here today, and I will turn the podium over to Lieutenant Governor Polito.
Thank you, Governor, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be here today for the nomination of Judge Serge Georges to our Commonwealth's highest court, and it's an honor to be with Michelle and your two beautiful daughters today. With this nomination of Judge Georges, we believe we have brought together a professional and diverse group of dedicated jurists who will serve the Commonwealth with distinction, and I've been honored to chair the hearings of these jurists with my colleagues on our Governor's Council. His background is extensive and impressive. Judge Georges managed a hectic courtroom for 7 years and presided over the Dorchester Drug Court. Through all his work, he has developed a reputation for treating everyone who came before him, as well as colleagues, staff, and attorneys, with courtesy and respect. While this is expected, it is not always practiced, especially in a fast-paced environment. A strong emphasis and value on education was instilled by his parents at a young age, as the Governor referred to. And as a fellow Eagle, Judge Georges graduated from Boston College and also attended BC High. He attended Suffolk University Law School. His connection to his alma maters remains strong, and he has a great sense of pride for the schools that he attended. I would say maybe more so his Boston College pride shows an awful lot. In January of this year, BC High awarded Judge Georges the James E. Carter 55 Courage Award, inducting him into the Hall of Fame. This award is presented to a member of the BC High community in recognition of courage in the face of adversity, tenacious spirit, and force of will. And I could think of no one better suited to receive that award and that recognition. As someone that continues to list BC High on his resume, and who has emulated Boston College's motto and mission, men and women for others, Judge Georges has embraced his Jesuit education and has served others as a well-rounded person and seeks the betterment of all mankind in and out of his courtroom. Judge Georges currently serves as the Vice Chair for BC High's Board of Trustees and teaches several classes for Suffolk Law, where he strives to mentor young law students and many law students and also practicing attorneys. As a judge in the Boston Municipal Court, Judge Georges has been on the front lines of one of the busiest courts in our Commonwealth. Colleagues point to his ability to move a busy docket and yet allow every litigant to feel that they were respected and heard and felt that they were fairly treated. Judge Georges also presided over the Dorchester Drug Court. Drug courts are treatment-focused programs working to help those who struggle with addiction and help them work through their addiction, as well as the criminal justice system in which they are introduced, mostly because of their addiction. They believe providing meaningful treatment is beneficial to both the addict and the community, with recovery being directly correlated to drops in criminal activity and recidivism. Presiding on the drug court, Judge Georges was known for giving those that came before him a chance and holding them accountable at the same time, as the Governor discussed. And when he discusses his time on the drug court, Judge Georges talks about this as being one of his greatest accomplishments in getting every one of our participants into meaningful inpatient substance use treatment and managing their sobriety. He believed in getting participants into treatment and meetings with participants in order to benefit not only the individuals, but because helping them benefited the community as a whole. And I know, Judge Georges, you take this very seriously, and I valued our discussion on that point specifically during our interview. He understands the practicality and real-world implications of his decisions, and I am confident that he will bring that frontline perspective to the SJC. Prior to joining the bench in 2013, Judge Georges had a varied and diverse practice, having been a partner of Barron and Stadfield. He also managed his own solo practice, not easy to do, handling everything from commercial litigation, housing, landlord-tenant matters, and criminal defense. His professional experiences in the private sector have helped shape his approach as a jurist, aware of the practical considerations for lawyers and litigants in accessing the courts and the costly considerations that affect litigation. Judge Georges has made a legal career out of his grit, his work ethic, and his intelligence. Those that have worked with him have said that he's impossible not to like and respect. He always finds a way to connect with people and commands attention in a room, while giving people an opportunity to just be themselves. I have the utmost confidence that if confirmed, Judge Georges will be an excellent addition to and will contribute to and complement the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. I look forward to the advice and consent of my colleagues on the Governor's Council, and I wish to thank the SJC Nominating Commission, chaired by our Chief Legal Counsel, Bob Ross, and Paul Dacier. I also wish to thank Lauren Green-Petrino and all of you for your hard work and dedication to this process. It is now my honor to introduce to you Judge Georges.
Good afternoon, everyone. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I would like to thank the governor and the lieutenant governor for their confidence in me in nominating me for this position. I certainly would like to thank the governor's chief legal counsel, Bob Ross, the executive director, and the staff of the Judicial Nominating Committee, Lauren Green-Petrino, and all of her staff. You don't get to this position of being the governor and the lieutenant governor's nominee for the Supreme Judicial Court by yourself. There are far too many people for me to name that helped to get me to this position. But I don't mean to be self-deprecating when I say I couldn't be here without them. And in broad categories, the attorneys and friends that I made in my professional career at Rackham & Sawyer and Brewster and Todd & Weld and Barron and Stadfeld, the staff and the colleagues at Suffolk University Law School and UMass Dartmouth Law School, and certainly some of the best people and judges in the world in the Boston Municipal Court Department. And that also includes the staff of the Boston Municipal Court as well as the staff of the Dorchester Division. There are two people that are not here physically with me, but they're with me at all times, that I know would be taking incredible pride to today. And that is Judge Paul McManus and the Dorchester Division Administrative Assistant Susan McTighe. Both of them were taken from us far too early, but had an incredible impact on me, and I hope that I'm making them proud. I could not and would not be here without the support of my family, my mother and my father, my two sisters, Marie and Nadia, and all of the friends that I have that have seen me to this point. And none other is more important and more integral than my wife, Michelle, and my two daughters, Olivia and Samantha. I'm really honored, Governor and Lieutenant Governor, for this opportunity. It's something that I can't really adequately express. I just don't have the words. But I tell you what I've told you throughout this process. I'm honored by it, and I will show my honor and my respect for this position by working as hard as I can to do the best that I can by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Last but not least, I also want to thank the chair of the SJC Judicial Nominating Committee, Paul Dacier, and the rest of the members of the SJC JNC. It's an incredibly difficult position that they're in to see all of these wonderful, talented, qualified candidates, and I'm certainly happy and honored and proud to have made it through to this point. Thank you.
Judge, you talked a little about the understanding of the law based on your studying with the Jesuits at Boston College and Boston College High. And on a lighter note, I of course have to ask you, do you have any history of drugs at Boston College?
I'll start with the last question first. I'm going to take the fifth on that one. There still might be a statute of limitations on that. The justice under God is the cornerstone of Jesuit principle and education. I had incredible teachers at BC High and BC that, of course, I couldn't be here without. The Jesuit tradition of being men and women for others, as it pertains to how I preside, is that there are always going to be opportunities where you can extend a hand to someone or give them an opportunity to earn a dismissal of their case or redemption. And so when you're at the community court level, at the district court level, Boston Municipal Court level, there are plenty of people that have just made mistakes that need some guidance in order to get back on their feet, stop committing crime, and be productive members of society. And that's a cornerstone principle of the Jesuit tradition. And I try to do that. I try to give people an opportunity to be successful, and I'm proud of that.
Your Honor, very few people have made the jump directly from the district court level to the SJC. I know you talked about some of the experience from executive people bring. What's the importance of having that sort of view on the Supreme Court here coming straight from that level?
Well, I think I'm going to go back and allude to some of the comments that the governor made. A lot of the precedential decisions that are made by the SJC have practical application every day in the community courts. Massachusetts is unique in its community court system, not only the district court department, but the Boston Municipal Court Department. So a lot of times what happens or the decisions that come out of the SJC, I'm proximate to the application of that and the effect of that every day. So I think it's important for the diversity of jurisdiction in terms of the folks that where they practice and how they practice is important. And so I'm glad to bring that perspective to the SJC and to the other Associate Justice and the Chief Justice of the SJC.
As a boy in Dorchester, would you have ever dreamed that you're going to be on the highest court in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts?
I may have said this 1,000 times today, and since getting the governor's call at 8:30 a.m. yesterday, no. And one of the most wonderful things about kind of life is that you never know. And even though you may come from very modest beginnings, you have no idea what a little bit of hard work, treating people right, and taking advantage of a break or a door that's been opened for you. And I've been the beneficiary of that, like I mentioned when I started my opening remarks. There's no way I'm here by myself. Through my own hands and through my own work ethic, I don't get here by myself. And so when I think about all of the people over the years that have helped me, giving me aid, helping me learn, listening to me when I was down and confused and trying to figure it out. So no, but I'm so glad to be here, and I'm glad I bring all of that with me.
Your Honor, can you speak to whether you'd ever given thought about how legislation on, say, safe injection sites would have affected people in your courtroom, especially, you know, if you're confirmed to the bench, that could be something that comes up in the future?
Well, that's the thing about Article 30 and the separation of powers, right? That's not my role, so I'm left with what the legislature gives us to interpret and apply. But I will say, during my time presiding over the drug court, that there have been really great inroads and help that we all have in the court system to help people with substance use disorders get treatment. The governor and lieutenant governor have increased the amount of treatment beds, and that's important because a lot of the court users in the district court and the Boston Municipal Court are poor, and so they're on mass health, and so everybody in all of the different courts are fighting for the same DPH beds. and without the governor and lieutenant governor's increase in those treatment beds, we'd all would be without any solace. So those things are there, and they're able to be used and implemented to see people get success. So if something else that comes at some later point, obviously, judges are going to use whatever they can to help people with their substance use disorders to get better, to not commit crime, and to reduce recidivism.
Judge, could you speak to the importance of ethnic diversity on the court? It's obviously been a goal of the governor. We've heard him explain. From your point of view, why is it important to have, I guess now 3 of 7 members of people of color on the court?
Well, I think just generally speaking, it cannot be reasonably disputed that diverse groups make better decisions. And so when you have diversity amongst genders and races and cultures, and including experience, it's going to lead to better decision making. And so I think when you look at some of the folks that the governor and lieutenant governor have nominated, it's not only, it would be very easy to just limit it to, well, there's a black person or there's a white person. It's deeper than that. It's more nuanced than that. Differing people of the same color may have very different experiences. So it can't be painted with that broad a brush. But I will say that when you look at some of the experience that the different justices had, both professionally, educationally, culturally, upbringing, that it can only lead to better decisions. And so I think one of the things that the Commonwealth should be very excited about is that they have an executive branch that puts their money where their mouth is when it comes to that.
Your Honor, you said there are several people you need to thank or want to thank. How did your parents play a role in this long term, their value of education, and how did they react when you told them the news?
Well, it was great. Unfortunately, but fortunately, my father had a heart attack about a month ago, and so he's in a rehab hospital right now, and so I was able to communicate through his treatment professionals about today and get him a couple of the press releases that came out today so that he could see it. My parents, it's really difficult for me to put into words what they mean to me and how they have informed my life and my success. They are wonderful people. They are the best people that I've ever met. I joked with the governor and lieutenant governor that my mom, as modest an income as she's always made, and for my sisters and I who have already gone on to be self-sufficient, there was always the folded up 20 that would always be slid into our hands with this double secret handshake on the way out the door. And that's just the kind of people that they are. Like most parents that I think have children and see that their lives are measured by what they do and what they achieve. It means everything to them. And when I told my mom about today's date, much like 7 years ago, she was filled with incredible pride. And the last part I'll just mention is, it's also important to acknowledge my Haitian heritage. And as Haitian immigrants, through all of the things that the Haitian people have been through with natural disasters and some of the other challenges with some of the governmental systems over the years, it's incredibly important for them to see that they came with the hope of giving us a better life. And I think through some measure of our achievement, they feel that they have.
Do you mind if I ask, was there ever a time that your family or extended family had fear of the government? And if so, how did you overcome that given the differences between here and Haiti in the 1980s and 70s?
Well, I think that's a direct reason why my father left. And so when my father was a lot younger, he went to work for the United Nations UNESCO program where he was assigned to teach in Zaire in the Congo. And part of that was the fear of being students and having big mouths. That was pretty much frowned upon by the Duvalier regime. And so my father ended up in Zaire, where my oldest sister was already born in Haiti. My mother and my second sister, Nadia, was born in Zaire. And after I was born in Manhattan, we lived in the Congo for 4 years while he finished his teaching commitment. And it was only after that we moved here. So it's indelible to my upbringing, because on the flip side of that was when we got here is the respect and the love for the Constitution and the law and all of the freedoms that we have here in the United States that they were not afforded in Haiti that led to us coming here. So I have a deep respect for the law and the application of the law, and I'm very glad to be in this position to continue to do it.
Governor, can you speak to, now that you've made 7 nominations over the course of your time as governor, broadly how you propose building the support that is, could be just your entirely of your nominees from ideologically, from diversity perspective, and how do you sort of look at the support as a group that is currently put together?
I guess what I would say is that the Lieutenant Governor and I, working with the Judicial Nominating Committee and with Bob and Lauren and previously with Lon and Sharon, we were basically looking for the same things I talked about back at the beginning, which was people who were considered to be first-class legal minds, folks who would deliver a certain amount of intellectual horsepower to the conversations to be had as they worked on the bench. The second was to see if we could find people who would basically take the law as it was and work with it. And the third thing was something that Justice George has talked about, which was trying to create a court that represented a lot of different pieces of the puzzle of the practice of law and the delivery of decisions in justice in Massachusetts. And honestly, I think there are only 4 or 5 lawyers or judges from the trial bench, from the district courts, who have ever made it to the SJC in the 200 and whatever it is years of the SJC. And if Justice George's is confirmed, 2 of them, Justice George's and Justice Lowy, will have been nominated by this administration. I think that's unbelievable. I mean, shocking, actually. But I've had several people tell me this morning that part of their excitement about Justice George's nomination is the message it sends about the fact that you can practice in the district courts, that you can be a district court judge, that you can be somebody who plays in what the vast majority of the field of law represents here in the Commonwealth of Mass, and get nominated to serve on this court. It just doesn't happen. And I think the other thing I would say is we wanted people who we felt would work well together. And if you read the applications and the due diligence and the recommendations and all the rest of all of these nominees, the one thing that comes across in all of them is that they are all collaborators, great listeners, and people who understand that the SJC is a team sport. And I certainly hope and anticipate that will come through if and when, if they all get confirmed.
Governor,
That report is part of your own legacy as a governor. I mean, they could be together for the next decade, if not more, as a group.
I mean, the Lieutenant Governor and I have talked about the fact that this is a really unusual circumstance. One maybe that hasn't happened since the beginning of the Commonwealth. I think Frank Sargent, people have said, appointed or nominated 6 members, but the only one they could think of that had nominated 7 was John Hancock. I think all 7 of these folks are, to use one of the words that was used in some of the feedback we got about Justice George's, are rock stars. And I really hope that Justice Bud gets confirmed as chief. I hope that Justice Wendlandt gets confirmed as an associate, and I certainly hope that Justice George gets confirmed as an associate at the SJC as well. The process is still going on, but I think as a group, the number of life experiences and personal experiences and professional experiences and legal background and product of work and quality of character and all the rest, that this group of people that we've been fortunate enough to get to know and nominate would bring to the bench would be really special.
Governor, what would you say in response to the handful of lawyers and others who argue there's not enough Western Massachusetts representation on the SJC?
There is always going to be a debate and discussion about how you handle issues associated with geography. And when we nominated Elspeth Cipher to serve on the SJC, she was the first nominee in over 100 years from Bristol County to the SJC. And what I would say in response to that is we take all of Massachusetts quite seriously and have nominated people to serve on the Superior Court, on the Appeals Court from Western Mass, and will continue to hope and anticipate that we can represent life experiences, ethnic diversity, gender, race, the whole shoot and match, as well as geography in the nominations that we make. And I think it's been a hallmark of the work we've done since the beginning, that if you look at the swath of all the folks we've appointed, it's a pretty broad collection of that I think does a good job of representing Massachusetts.
Last question.
Could I ask you a question about the coronavirus?
Yeah. Won't be the first time, that's for sure. Yeah.
We've done a lot of testing, 7.3 million, something to be proud of. However, we're seeing long lines, especially for asymptomatic. The kids coming home from Thanksgiving, it's 4 or 5 hours, and then it's $160. Can we do better with testing for that particular segment, someone that doesn't have a symptom?
We're continuing to work through. There's a bunch of things going on with respect to testing generally and asymptomatic testing in particular. Some of which are going to be driven by conversations we're currently having with the feds and with some other folks about what we're doing here in Massachusetts and how we might be able to do more. Remember, a lot of the decisions we make about testing have to be done on terms and under guidelines and approvals from the federal level, so that factors into some of this. But we're also making progress on creating additional testing capacity that gets beyond the traditional way it's been done to date. And I think the best example of this is we just finished a fairly big sampling exercise around accuracy and performance on the Binex Now tests, which are the 15-minute rapid tests on the card that were developed by Abbott. We will end up getting a couple of million of those from the feds, and we have some thoughts about how we will put those to use. And I do think as we move into the rest of this year, you'll see us working to try to get some latitude from the feds to do some things that will help with respect to the lines we have now around our existing testing protocols. But I think you're also going to see some new products come into the marketplace that are going to make it possible for people to significantly expand testing without necessarily having to use the pathways and the routes that we've used traditionally to make this happen. It's an issue, I agree.
What about the digital
Are there
content?
any issues with unemployment? We're starting to hear some people complain that they're having trouble with access again. I know you had a huge launch back when it first started with the call center and stuff. Any tweaks there? Are you hearing any complaints?
So the biggest challenge I think we face at this point in time with respect to unemployment insurance generally is the continued and ongoing effort of a lot of really bad actors to fraud the system. And this is not just true in Massachusetts. This is now true in all 50 states. And it creates all kinds of problems. One of the first problems it creates, because we now have a bunch of tells, things that we know represent applications that have proven to be fraudulent in the past, right? Proven fraudulent in the past. And those tells are showing up a lot in new applications. Not just here in Massachusetts, but in other states as well, which does a couple things. Number one, it misrepresents the total number of people, real people, who are actually filing for UI. Okay? If you get 700 or 1,000 UI applications from the same address in a couple of hours, there's a message in that, okay? And this is going on all over the country. So point number one, there are a bunch of tells. They are critical to us to make sure that we deal with them, but they are a big part of a lot of the new applications, new claimants that are coming into the UI system all over the country, which makes figuring out what's actually going on with unemployment claims a lot more complicated than it should be. The second thing is we have to work our way through those tells and then get to the point where we actually cull out the people who are legitimate and make sure that they can then work their way through the process and get the unemployment benefit that they're entitled to. That does add a few days. It doesn't add much more than that to the initial application process. But there's a lot going on in that space right now, everywhere, all over the country, that involves a continuation, and in some cases an acceleration and a new sophistication on a lot of the work that was being done on a very targeted basis back in the spring by a bunch of people who've stolen a ton of identities and are trying to put them to work.
Governor, by when would you like to see a digital contact tracing system, whether it involves Bluetooth signals or something else?
There are two big issues with digital contact tracing systems. One is trust. You cannot underestimate how important the issue around trust is when it comes to contact tracing. And I think in many respects, part of the reason you haven't seen digital contact tracing adopted in a big way in many of what I would call the Western, world democracies is the concern about basically targeting and tagging people based on the presence of their phone in certain locations. That comes with some real downsides about how people feel about contact tracing generally. And the second thing is we have the privacy issues associated with this, separate and apart from the trust question, are ones that we don't believe have been adequately addressed by any of the platforms that we've talked to.
Thanks, everybody. I want to ask about the Transportation Climate Initiative. There was a letter today sent by a group of people in support of it. Do you know where we are in with that agreement? Is it coming soon? Is it something that you still support currently during the pandemic and given the current economic climate?
Yeah, the biggest thing we've been doing, and this has been done in conjunction with the other states that have been part of this dialogue, is reprogramming some of the data around modeling the impact, because we're living in a point in time now that's dramatically different than the point in time we were living in when people's expectations about miles traveled and all the rest were a lot different than they are today. And that modeling, I think, is an important part of figuring out how people feel about the cost benefit that's associated with the program and the product. And it's certainly something that we think is an important part of helping states make decisions on this.
Thanks, guys.
Governor,
Thank you.
when it comes to vaccines and Moderna announcing
Yeah.
theirs on Monday, is there any particular benefit to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, either in distribution or really any kind of positives that we would see from something like that?
You mean the fact that there are two companies that are both operating at a 90% plus effectiveness rate, that both happen to have, one is headquartered here and the other's doing a lot of their lab work and their research work here, to the people of Massachusetts?
Are we in the line with 49 other states to get those vaccines? Is there any kind of direct benefit to them being local?
I think it's a little early in the process to answer that question. We spent a lot of time talking to our colleagues at the federal level about what the rollout's going to look like and how they plan to build a distribution network. I do think proximity is never a bad thing in the context of how both distribution and storage would work. The fact that we have two companies here so far that are going to have a big presence, both on the research, the testing, and on the manufacture side of things with respect to COVID vaccines is a good thing. I mean, just if you have a choice between being really far away from it and being right next to it, you're always better off to be right next to it. But the distribution process is going to be one where states are partnering with the federal government on an overarching plan that has been developed or is being developed by the federal government, because the federal government, for all intents and purposes, is the key player around both approvals and a big piece of the spending that's attached to this, as well as paying for the actual vaccine itself once it starts to get distributed. I think having two companies here, there's also a big J&J study going on at several Massachusetts hospitals for another vaccine. What it really is a big statement about just how much intellectual horsepower in the life science space exists here in Massachusetts, and why this place has been such a godsend in many cases to people dealing with very significant and either damaging or deadly illnesses over the course of the past 20 years. This in some ways is just one more story that's very similar to many others. I mean, Vertex is probably the best example, or at least the most well-known one. CF, for all intents and purposes, is no longer, for the vast majority of the people who get it, a death sentence for kids. And that was based on 10 or 15 years worth of work, most of which was done by researchers and clinicians here in the Commonwealth. This is just one more, it's one more story in a big, long line of very important stories about the advancement of research in medicine that's come out of the research institutes, the companies, and the brains that exist here in Massachusetts. Thanks, everybody.